What's up, my poker friends? Welcome to another episode of Poker Breakdown, where we take hands from you, the community, and we break down complex spots into easier to understand tips to help you level up your poker game and get a little bit better every single day. Today's episode is titled Go Fast or Go Slow. Let's take a look at a hand from Team Pro Mika Richards. So Mika is in the small blind here with King Jack of Spades on a 25 big blind stack. Under the gun 2 opens here to 2 big blinds. And the first thing we have to figure out here is what we're supposed to do here in the small blind. If we take a look at Range Trainer Pro here, we see that King Jack of Spades is actually a pure jam. Now, I'll be honest, this is a jam I very rarely get to. Most of my 25 big blind jams consist of strong pocket pairs or hands like ace king or ace queen suited. So this is definitely a spot I don't get to. You also can make an argument for not 3-betting or jamming here in situations where ICM is a factor, or we think that we have some sort of significant edge on our opponent that is opening, and so we want to take that edge post flop rather than shoving and allowing our opponent to kind of play near perfect poker. By near perfect poker, I basically mean they're not going to really make any mistakes. They know when they're going to shove. They know what they're going to fold. It doesn't really apply that much pressure because they start to play their hand face up at that point. Mika makes the call and flops the absolute nuts. Now, this is a place where I see people make a lot of mistakes. In the blinds, some players are really compelled to bet here when they hit a piece of this flop because they're either uncomfortable facing a c-bet or they just don't know what to do. We 100% want to check in these situations, both from a theory perspective and from a practical perspective. The reason is the vast majority of opponents you're going to play are going to bet if they hit any part of this flop. So they're going to put chips in for us, and then we simply have the option of deciding whether we want to call or put more chips in and raise. When they don't bet, it's because they have literally no part of this board, and we have such a strong part of this board, we're okay if they check behind because we're going to need them to catch up in order to get some value from them. So we should really never be leading here in these types of situations. So just in the majority of situations, when you flop a good hand here in the small blind, just check and let your opponent bet. Mika's opponent bets 1.77 big blinds here into 5.9 big blinds for about a quarter pot. And now we have a decision to make. And this is a tricky spot because the decision is going to be very player dependent. And it may not be based on what you're thinking it is. The decision to raise or call is going to come down to how likely we think our opponent is going to be to bet on the turn. We obviously have a hand that wants to play for stacks. The more likely our opponent is to bet turns, the more we can let them feed the pot, and we can decide to put in a check raise at a later time in order to get stacks all the way in. The more passive they are, the more they're likely to check back, the more we need to be willing to check raise here to build a pot, or call this and lead turns. A lot of opponents c-bet flops, but very rarely follow through on turns with a double barrel. That's why we can make more leads on the turn, even though leading would be so bad on the flop. Now, the reason some of you might be most likely to raise here is because you're worried about the flush draw. But there's a little trick here that's extremely important. When you're facing earlier position openers, under the gun +1, under the gun +2, the first 3 spots at a full ring table, and the flush draw that's out there has the ace on the flop or has additional Broadway cards on the flop, it really cuts into the number of flush combinations that your opponent can have. So in this situation, both the ace of hearts and the queen of hearts is out there on the board. That takes away a lot of the flush combos in this player's opening range. They're really limited to king jack of hearts, king 10 of hearts, jack 10 of hearts, 10-9 of hearts, 9-8 of hearts, and so on. All of the ace x of hearts and all of the queen x of hearts can't be in their hand. So while this board may seem scary, we really don't have a lot of flush draws to worry about, and our brains don't always intuitively figure that out. Mika elects to call, and the turn is the 7 of spades, giving her still the nuts, but now with a flush redraw. Now, we don't have the privilege of knowing who this opponent is. The hand replayer doesn't show us. Mika may have some extensive history with this player that leads into her decision-making process that we're not privy to. But in a vacuum, if I'm playing this hand against a random opponent on global, I'm definitely going to want to lead this card. Because our opponent went really, really small on the flop, it's unlikely that they're going to have a lot of big sizings here on turn. It's more likely they have a lot of weaker hands that aren't going to want to double barrel here. And I really don't want to go check here. Again, it's not because I'm scared of the river card. It's because I want to be in a position to build a pot. If this goes check, it's really, really bad for us because now there's 9 big blinds in the middle. We still have 22 big blinds on our stack, and we don't have an easy way to play for stacks here when we're holding one of the best hands we can possibly have. So I would really like to see a lead here and try to set it up so that the pot size is the same size as our stack heading to the river. A cool little math hack you can do whenever you want to set up a stack to pot ratio of 1 is take the smallest stack, subtract what is currently in the pot, and divide by 3. So here we're going to call Mika's stack 22 big blinds. We're going to call the pot 9 big blinds. If you subtract the 2, you're going to get 13. You divide by 3, and you're going to get 4 1/3. If you bet 4 1/3 here, 4.33 big blinds, your opponent calls. There's now going to be about 18 big blinds in the middle, and we're going to have 18 big blinds in our stack, which means we've got a nice pot size shove on the river. Unfortunately, our opponent does check back, and the river is the 2 of hearts. Mika puts out a 7 big blind bet, and our opponent jams over the top. This is a really, really tricky situation. You'll remember earlier I said our opponent doesn't have a lot of flush draw combos, and they don't. So putting them on a flush here is really, really hard to do. At the same time, you have to ask yourself what value hands they have. It's extremely unlikely that our opponents checked back any kind of set on the turn with all of the straight draws and flush draws that are out there. Most of the 2-pair hands would get scared on the turn and want to protect their hand. Really, the only value hands that make sense here is if you come to the river with a hand like ace deuce suited or pocket 2s. On the flip side, they can still have king jack here for a chop, and they could just be a player who is over bluffing in a spot like this, expecting us to fold. As played, Mika does elect to make the fold here. I do think it's close, and I do trust Mika that she probably had additional information that factored into her decision. All in all, I think the key play here, though, is to either check raise the flop or lead the turn big so that we're in a position where we can have some shoves on river, or maybe just take it down on the turn. I hope you picked up some new cool tips and tricks here in the video. As always, smash that like button and hit the subscribe button as well so you can get notifications when new episodes come out. Drop a line in the comments. Let us know how you would play this hand differently or what line you would take in this exact situation. As always, all of my social media links are down below. And if you're interested in being in a future episode of Poker Breakdown, my contact info is there. You can send me a hand history and maybe your hand will be next on the Poker Breakdown. That's it for me, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.